Marikina's haunted flood zone, still waiting to be saved. The woman who ran. The woman came running out of Santa Clara Extension just after midnight, barefoot, soaked, screaming. At first, the tricycle driver thought she had been robbed. Her hair was stuck to her face, her blouse was torn at the shoulder, and her eyes were wide with a kind of fear that did not belong to ordinary danger. She kept looking behind her. Not once, not twice, again and again, as if something was following her slowly enough to be seen, but not fast enough to escape. The driver stopped near the corner. "Ma'am, anong nangyari?" What happened? The woman tried to answer, but only a broken sound came out. Then the smell reached him. Mud. Not the clean smell of rain, not the sharp smell of wet pavement. This was old mud, river mud, stagnant water, rotting leaves, something trapped too long under floodwater. The driver covered his nose. The woman grabbed his arm. "Do not go there," she whispered. Then, from somewhere behind her, deep inside Santa Clara Extension, came 3 knocks. Knock, knock, knock. The driver turned his head. The road behind the woman was dark. The streetlights were weak. Some houses had gates locked with rusted chains. Some had broken windows. Some looked empty, but not abandoned. Not exactly. More like they were waiting. Then he saw movement near the bend. A child stepped into the weak light. The child was covered from head to foot in black river mud. His hair was pasted across his forehead. His shirt clung to his small body. His face was swollen, gray, and rotting, as if the water had kept him soft for years. He raised one hand. The fingers were broken. The nails were packed with mud. His mouth opened. Brown water spilled down his chin. Then he whispered, "Tulong. Help!" The woman began to scream again. Behind the child, more shapes appeared. A man with half his face hidden under mud. An old woman bent forward, dripping water from her sleeves. 2 children holding hands. A mother carrying something wrapped in a soaked blanket. They did not walk like monsters. They walked like people still exhausted from drowning. Slow, confused, desperate. One by one, their mouths opened. "Save me. Please. The water is rising. My child is inside." The driver reversed so fast that the tricycle nearly tipped over. The woman climbed in without being told. As they sped away, the knocking followed them. Not from the road, not from the houses, from inside the tricycle roof. Knock, knock, knock. By the time they reached the main road, the woman had stopped screaming. She was staring at her arms. The driver looked down and saw them too. Handprints, small, muddy handprints, all over her skin, as if children had been holding her while she ran. That was one of the stories Rosalie heard before she went to Santa Clara Extension. There were others. A delivery rider who saw a muddy man crawling out of a drainage canal. A student who heard crying behind a locked gate. A caretaker who said he smelled dead floodwater inside a dry house. A young couple who claimed 3 rotting children stood in front of their car and begged them not to leave. Most people dismissed the stories. They said it was stress, old trauma, flood memories. Fear passed from neighbor to neighbor until the whole place felt cursed. But the stories kept coming, and the details were always the same. The smell came first, then the knocking, then the moaning, then the voices, and finally, the dead. Not white ghosts, not shadows, not floating spirits. Bodies, rotting, muddy, drowned, still asking for rescue because they did not know they had already died. Rosalie was religious. She believed in God. She prayed every night. She carried a rosary from her mother in her bag and a small cross around her neck. But she was also practical. She was a documentary creator, not a ghost hunter. Her small channel covered forgotten places, local legends, abandoned homes, and stories people whispered about but rarely admitted in daylight. When she first heard about Santa Clara Extension, she thought it was another tragic neighborhood legend. A flood-damaged area, low rents, empty houses, stories exaggerated by fear. But then she found old posts, comments, and rumors from people who spoke about the place as if the haunting was not a legend, as if it was still happening. So Rosalie packed her camera, flashlight, microphone, extra batteries, rain jacket, and rosary. Before leaving, she stood at her door and prayed, "Lord, protect me. If there are souls in pain, give them peace. And if there is something darker there, do not let it deceive me." Then she made the sign of the cross and went to Marikina. She thought she was going to film a story about ghosts. She did not know that by morning, her own voice would become part of it. Santa Clara Extension. Rosalie arrived in Marikina under a heavy gray sky. The air felt swollen with rain. Traffic moved in the distance, but near Santa Clara Extension, the city became strangely quiet. Not silent. There were still dogs barking, motorcycles passing, and a television playing somewhere behind a wall. But the sounds felt far away, as if she were hearing them from underwater. The tricycle driver refused to take her all the way in. "Dito na lang, ma'am." "Here?" Rosalie asked. He nodded. "You can walk from here." She looked down the road. "Is it because of the flood damage?" The driver did not answer. "Or because of the stories?" she asked. His hand tightened on the handlebars. "People still live there," he said. "Some, not many. But after dark, do not stay." Rosalie lifted her camera. "Have you seen anything?" The driver looked at the road ahead. "No." Then, after a pause, he said, "But I have heard them." Rosalie waited. He leaned closer and lowered his voice. "When they knock, do not answer. When they call you, do not look back. And if they ask for help..." He stopped. "What?" Rosalie asked. He looked at her. "Pray, but do not open anything." Then he drove away. Rosalie stood alone at the entrance to Santa Clara Extension. She turned on her camera. "My name is Rosalie Galenia," she said softly. "Today, I am in a fictionalized area I will call Santa Clara Extension, inspired by flood-damaged communities and ghost lore around Marikina. According to stories, this place was badly affected by major floods. After that, many people left. Some houses stayed empty. Some rents dropped. But locals say the real reason people avoid this place is not only the water." She paused. A wind moved through the street. "It is what the water left behind." She walked forward. At first, the area looked normal. Small houses, narrow streets, gates, plants, old walls painted in fading colors. But then the details began to change. A rusted gate hanging open. a window boarded from the inside. A house with no roof light, no curtain movement, no sound. A balcony covered in mud stains, though the street below was dry. On one wall, Rosalie saw a brown line above her head. The old flood mark. She lifted the camera. "The water reached this high," she whispered. She imagined a child standing there. Then she imagined the child disappearing under the water. Rosalie touched the cross at her neck. The smell came suddenly. Mud, deep and heavy. It filled her nose and throat. Wet concrete, rotting leaves, mold, rust. And something else. Something sweet and rotten beneath the dampness. She covered her mouth. "It smells like something died in the walls," she said. The words sounded too loud. A dog barked somewhere behind her, then suddenly stopped. Rosalie turned. The street behind her looked empty. Ahead, the road bent slightly to the left. That was the corner. The place people mentioned again and again. A cluster of flood-damaged houses stood around it. Some were occupied. Some were sealed. Some looked like no human had entered them in years. A broken streetlight leaned over the bend. A drainage canal ran beside the road. And beside the canal stood a two-story house with a rusted green gate. Not the only haunted house, just the one people saw first. Rosalie took one step closer. Then the knocking began. Knock, knock, knock. She froze. The sound came from the green-gated house, then from another house across the street. Knock. Then from the drainage canal. Knock. Then from behind her. Knock. Rosalie turned quickly. No one was there. Only the empty street. Only the old flood marks. Only the smell of river mud growing stronger. Then a voice whispered from somewhere near the bend. A child's voice. Small, wet, tired. "Ate!" Rosalie's fingers tightened around the rosary in her pocket. The voice came again. "Ate! Save me." The area that never dried. Rosalie should have left. Later, when people watched the footage, many said that was the exact moment she should have turned around. The first voice, the first smell, the first knock from a place where no hand could be. But Rosalie stayed. Not because she was careless, because the voice sounded real. Too real. It did not sound like a prank. It did not sound like a speaker or a recording. It sounded like a child trying not to cry because crying wasted breath. Rosalie raised her camera. "Hello?" she called. No answer. She walked toward the bend. The air felt colder there. Not winter cold. Not natural cold. The cold of wet clothes left in a dark room. The cold of floodwater against the chest. She passed the first empty house. Its windows were dark. As she moved by, something knocked from inside. Once. Very softly. Then a face appeared behind the glass. Rosalie gasped and stepped back. It was a woman. Her forehead pressed against the window. Her hair hung in wet strands over her cheeks. Mud covered her nose and mouth. One eye was open, white and cloudy. The skin of her face was swollen and rotting, peeling at the jawline like wet paper. Her mouth moved. Rosalie heard nothing at first. Then the microphone picked it up. "Open." Rosalie stumbled backward. The face vanished. Inside the house, something dragged across the floor. Rosalie began praying under her breath. "Our Father, who art in heaven." A moan rose from the drainage canal. Low, long, human. Then another moan answered from inside a locked gate. Then another from upstairs in a house with no stairs visible from outside. The whole corner began to breathe. Rosalie turned in a slow circle, filming everything. The street was empty, but the sounds were full of people. Crying, coughing, knocking, scratching, water dripping. Someone whispering, "Tulong." Someone else whispering, "My baby." Then she felt it. A touch on her wrist. Cold fingers. Small fingers. She looked down. A muddy child stood beside her. He was maybe 6 years old, or had been. His shirt was torn open at the shoulder. His skin was gray and bloated. Mud filled one ear. His lips were cracked, and when he looked up at Rosalie, his eyes were not angry. They were confused. "Ate," he whispered. "Where is my mother?" Rosalie could not move. The child reached for her hand. His fingers passed over her skin, but she felt them anyway. Cold, wet, heavy, like being touched by water with memory. Then his face changed. For 1 second, she saw what he had looked like before. A normal boy. Scared. Crying. Human. Then the rot returned. His cheeks sagged. Mud slid from his mouth. His head tilted at an unnatural angle. "Help me," he whispered. Rosalie screamed and stepped away. The child disappeared, but his muddy footprints remained on the dry road. Small prints, leading toward the green-gated house. Rosalie's camera began to glitch. Static, a burst of sound. Then a voice, very close to the microphone, whispered, "She can see us." Rosalie spun around. The street was no longer empty. Figures stood at the edges of the houses. A woman by a gate, an old man beside the canal, 2 children under the broken streetlight, a man leaning from a balcony, all covered in mud, all rotting, all staring at her. Their mouths opened together. Water spilled out. "Save me. Help. Please. The water is rising." Rosalie backed away. "I cannot help you," she cried. "I do not know how." The old man by the canal lifted his shaking hand and pointed toward the green-gated house. His fingers were black with mud. "Inside," he whispered. Rosalie shook her head. "No." The woman by the gate began knocking. Not on the gate, on her own chest. Knock, knock, knock. Her ribs sounded hollow. Then every figure began knocking. On gates, on walls, on windows, on their own bodies. The sound became a rhythm, a warning, a demand, a memory. Rosalie felt pressure in her ears, as if she had gone underwater. The smell became unbearable. Mud, rot, dead flowers, molded clothes, rust, old river. Then, behind the green gate, a baby cried. Rosalie closed her eyes. "Lord, help me," she whispered, and opened the gate.
The House at the Bend.
The green gate screamed when Rosalie pushed it open. Inside the yard, the grass had grown wild. Broken tiles led to the front door. The walls were stained with brown flood scars almost to the second floor. A child's slipper lay near the steps. It was caked in mud. Rosalie knew she should not touch it. Still, she bent down. The moment her fingers brushed the slipper, a vision struck her. Water rushing through the gate, people screaming, furniture floating, hands slamming against windows, someone shouting from upstairs, children crying in the dark. Rosalie fell backward onto the wet grass, but the grass was not wet before. She looked at her palm. Mud. Fresh mud. The baby cried again from inside the house. Then came the knocking. 3 knocks from the front door. Knock, knock, knock. Rosalie lifted her camera. If anyone living is inside, call out now. Silence. Then a woman whispered, "Please, my child is trapped." Rosalie was crying now. She knew it might not be real. She knew the driver had warned her. She knew every story said not to answer. But if there was even a small chance that someone needed help, she opened the door. The smell hit her like a physical blow. Rotting water, dead leaves, mold, old wood, mud, and bodies. Rosalie gagged and covered her mouth. The living room was dark. Furniture sat in broken positions. A cabinet leaned against the wall. The old flood line reached higher than the windows. But the worst thing was the sound. Not one voice, many. All muffled, all close, as if people were trapped inside the walls. Tulong, open, please. Rosalie. She stopped. They had said her name. She backed toward the door, but it swung shut behind her. The room darkened. Her flashlight flickered. Then footsteps moved upstairs. Wet footsteps, slow, heavy, squelching through mud. Rosalie lifted the rosary and began to pray. Hail Mary, full of grace. A knock answered from the ceiling. The Lord is with thee. A knock from the kitchen. Blessed art thou among women. A knock from under the floor. And blessed is the fruit of thy womb. A child whispered right beside her ear. Do prayers work underwater? Rosalie screamed. Her flashlight went out. For 1 second, the house was completely dark. Then the camera screen lit up by itself. Through the camera, the living room was flooded. Water reached the ceiling. Bodies floated near the stairs. Hands knocked from beneath the surface. A woman pressed her face against the inside of the window, mouth open, eyes bulging. A child was trapped under a table, still reaching upward. Rosalie lowered the camera. With her own eyes, the room was dry. She raised the camera again. Floodwater. Lowered it. Dry. Raised it. Death. Lowered it. Dark room. That was when the smell became warm. Not just mud now. Decay. Rotting flesh under dirty water. The rotting corpses began to appear without the camera. First near the stairs, then behind the couch, then in the kitchen doorway. They stood slowly, as if rising from invisible water. Their clothes clung to their bodies. Their skin had split in places. Mud filled their mouths. Their faces were swollen beyond recognition, but their eyes still held the terror of their final moments. They did not know they were dead. That was the worst part. One woman looked around the living room, panicked. "The water," she whispered. "The water is coming." A man beat his fists against the wall. "Open the door!" A child crawled toward Rosalie, leaving a trail of wet mud behind him. "Ate," he said, "carry me." Rosalie backed away. "I cannot," she sobbed. "I cannot." The child's face twisted, not with anger, but with betrayal. "Why?" Behind him, the others began to move. Slowly, reaching, begging, crying, rotting mouths opening and closing. "Save me! Do not leave! Help us! Stay with us!" The final words were different. Rosalie heard them clearly. "Stay with us." The house shook. Water began pouring down the stairs, but it did not splash like normal water. It moved like a living thing. Dark, thick, full of mud. The ghosts turned toward it, screaming. Not at Rosalie, at the flood. They were reliving it. Again, again, again. And now the flood had seen her too. 6 senses of the dead. Rosalie ran for the door. The living room stretched. The front door moved farther away. Every wall began to knock. Every window shook. Every floor tile trembled under invisible fists. Knock, knock, knock. The sound was no longer only outside her. She felt it in her chest, in her teeth, in her bones. A 6th sense opened inside her, something deeper than sight or hearing. She could feel them now, not just see them. She felt their fear, the crushing weight of water, the burn in their lungs, the panic of fingers slipping from door frames, the horror of hearing children cry and being unable to reach them. For one terrible second, Rosalie understood them. They were not trying to scare people. They were still trying to survive. But survival had rotted into hunger. Help had become a trap. Memory had become a mouth. The muddy woman crawled toward her. Her face was collapsing under layers of mud. One cloudy eye rolled toward Rosalie. Her lips split as she spoke. "Please," she whispered. "My baby is inside." Rosalie shook her head. "No!" The woman reached out. Her hand closed around Rosalie's ankle. The cold shot through Rosalie's body. Suddenly, she was not in the house anymore. She was underwater. Brown water everywhere, screaming above her, furniture striking her side, a child's hand slipping from her fingers, her own mouth opening to breathe and filling with mud. Rosalie fought, kicked, and prayed, "Jesus, help me!" The vision shattered. She was back on the floor. The woman still held her ankle, but now the woman's voice had changed. It was lower, deeper, not human. "Then drown with us." Rosalie kicked free and lunged for the door. The rotting figures crowded around her. Some begged, some cried, some only stared, confused, as if wondering why rescue had taken so long. One child reached for her camera. His muddy fingers touched the lens. The screen filled with static. Then the child whispered, "When you show them, they will hear us too." Rosalie screamed and pulled the door open. Outside, Santa Clara Extension was flooded. Not in real life, not fully, but in the place between memory and death. The street was both dry and underwater. The houses were both standing and drowning. The air was both empty and full of screams. Under the broken streetlight stood dozens of figures. Children, adults, old people, all rotting, all covered in mud, all waiting. The woman from the house stepped outside behind Rosalie. She pointed at her. "You heard us." The others repeated it. "You heard us. You answered. You opened." Rosalie ran. She ran past the drainage canal, past the locked gates, past the flood marks, past the houses where faces appeared in windows and hands knocked from inside walls. The dead did not chase her quickly. They did not need to. Their voices followed. "Rosalie, help me. Save me. Stay." She reached the edge of Santa Clara Extension and collapsed near the main road. The city sounds returned. Motorcycles, dogs, a distant television, normal life. Rosalie lay there gasping. Her camera had fallen beside her, still recording. She looked at her hands. They were covered in mud. Fresh, dark, wet. The mud moved slightly in the lines of her palms, as if something under it was breathing. Then she heard one final knock. Not from the road, not from the houses, from inside her camera. Knock, knock, knock. A whisper followed. It was a woman's voice, her own voice. "Help me." The story after Rosalie. Rosalie Galenia was found the next morning sitting beside the main road, alive, but different. She would not speak for 3 days. When she finally did, she said only one thing. "They do not know." Her sister asked, "Who?" Rosalie looked toward the window, even though they were nowhere near Santa Clara Extension. "The dead," she whispered. "They do not know they are dead." Her footage was later uploaded by someone from her team. Some viewers said it was fake. Some said the ghosts were actors. Some said the rotting faces were makeup, the knocking was sound design, the mud was staged, and Rosalie had created the whole thing for attention. But not everyone in Marikina laughed. Some recognized the smell she described. Some recognized the flood marks. Some recognized the way the stories always began. Knocking, moaning, voices asking for help. And after the video spread, more people came forward. A woman said she had once rented a house near the area because the rent was unusually low. She left after one rainy night when she heard children knocking from inside her closet. A jeepney driver said he never passed the bend after midnight because a muddy old man once stood in front of his headlights and mouthed the words, "The water is coming." A caretaker said empty houses in the area sometimes smelled of river mud, even during dry months. And one former resident said the worst part was not seeing them. It was feeling them. That sudden cold on the back of your neck. The pressure in your ears is like sinking underwater. The taste of mud in your mouth. The grief that entered your chest for no reason. The instinct that told you someone was standing behind you, soaking wet, waiting for you to turn around. Rosalie stopped making videos after that. She went to church often. She prayed for the dead. She lit candles. She asked priests what it meant if a soul did not understand it had passed on. No one gave her an answer that helped, because every time it rained, she heard knocking. At first, it came from her window, then from her bathroom wall, then from under her bed. 3 knocks, always 3. Knock, knock, knock. And after the knocking came the smell. Mud, river water, rot. Then the voices. Rosalie, help me. You heard us. You opened. You came back dry. One night, during heavy rain, Rosalie's sister found her standing at the front door with her hand on the lock. Her eyes were open. Her face was calm, but tears were running down her cheeks. Outside, someone was knocking. A child's voice whispered, "Ate." Rosalie whispered back, "I know you are dead." The knocking stopped. For 1 second, everything was silent. Then dozens of voices answered from the other side of the door. "No! The water is rising! Open!" Rosalie's sister pulled her away from the door and held her until morning. After that, Rosalie left Marikina. But some stories say the corner in Santa Clara Extension changed again. Now, when people pass there after heavy rain, they still see the rotting figures, the muddy children, the drowned adults, the old people with cloudy eyes. But sometimes, standing among them, there is a woman holding a camera. She is not as rotten as the others. Not yet. Her face is pale. Her clothes are wet. Her hands are stained with mud. She looks directly at anyone who slows down near the bend. And she does not say, "Help me." She says, "Do not answer them." Then the dead around her begin to knock, and the whole street whispers, "Save me." This story is fictional. Rosalie Galenia, Santa Clara Extension, as described here, the haunted area, the rotting ghosts, and the events in this narration are fictional. The story is inspired by flood memories, urban legends, and public discussions around flood-affected communities in Marikina. Provident Village was severely affected by Typhoon Ondoy/Ketsana in 2009, and again by Typhoon Ulysses/Vamco in 2020. This video is not intended to identify or disrespect any real victims, families, homeowners, or communities. Thank you for watching. If this story pulled you into the dark streets of Marikina's haunted flood zone, and if you could almost hear the knocking, smell the mud, or feel the drowned still waiting in the rain, then please help this channel grow. Like this video, subscribe for more dark stories, eerie legends, and cinematic horror narrations. Share it with someone who enjoys ghost stories that feel a little too real. And leave a comment below. Tell me, would you stop if someone covered in mud asked you for help? Or would you keep walking? Your likes, comments, and shares help me create more stories like this. Stories from forgotten places, haunted corners, and the shadows left behind by tragedy. Thank you for being here. And remember, if you ever hear knocking after the rain, do not answer too quickly.